What an honor to have you join us today for peacepodcast.org. I'm Barbara Gahn Mueller. I'll be your host for the next 20 minutes. You know, I was putting together why we have peacepodcast.org for peace, justice, and love, I added today, because our guest, Jane Olson, is the 8th annual Peace Prize winner for the United Nations Association of Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, and Ventura County, the 8th annual Peace Prize winner. And when I read her book, and you're going to hear more about her book, the book, World Citizen, Journeys of a Humanitarian, I just kept feeling love. It was the love that she took into these war-torn areas. And it's love that I feel. I can't stop reading her book. I have work to do, but I have this book on my desk because I need 20 pages a day to keep me motivated. Jane, welcome to peacepodcast.org.
Thank you so much, Barbara, and thank you for your kind words. You are my target reader because you get the essence of my message and the essence of my life work, and I greatly appreciate that.
The essence of her message and the essence of her life work. Don't you all want to say those words someday? Simply by showing up, one caring person can hold up a mirror to people who have forgotten who they are, a mirror that can work two ways, in the reflection of the other. As we began to kind of warm up for our podcast today, Jane, I asked her one question. What do you want me to be sure I ask you? And she said, to ponder the question of the other. And that's what I underlined in her book. It was like we were in this harmonic moment, because I know the coincidences just always occur. When Sharon Byrne and I were talking about our 8th annual Peace Prize winner, I said, have you read Jane Olson's book? She said, not only have I read it, do you realize when I was in charge of the Montecito Association, Jane came out and helped me work with the homeless. This is a woman who has been all over the world. But what does she do when she hears the homeless are in trouble? She walks out there with me and we go to the homeless camp. Did you do that, Jane?
Well, I certainly did, because, I've worked with refugees. I've traveled all over the world to meet refugees and displaced persons. And if you think about it, the unsheltered in our communities in this wealthy country, they are really refugees. They have no place to live. They have no home. They are displaced, and that's the definition of a refugee.
And just like you said, you hold up the mirror to the people who have been forgotten. And we ignore, let's not get into that, because I want to talk about who you are as the Jane Olson, who has experienced some of the world's most forsaken places. Her accounts do not dwell on the dismal, but elevate those who work and hope for something better. She combines a journalist's eye and the turn of phrase with compassion and empathy of a genuine humanitarian. What emerges in this book, which I said, World Citizen, Journeys of a Humanitarian by Ken Roth, Executive Director of Human Rights Watch, what emerges amid the horrors of injustice is the celebration of humanity. Talk about words that mean everything, the celebration of humanity. We are one, aren't we, Jane?
Yes, we absolutely are. And the other thing I was thinking about as you read those words is, we have to be who we are no matter where we are. So I certainly have to be a caregiver for everyone that I encounter. But I essentially am a woman, a mother, now a grandmother of 8 college-age grandsons. And I think that I travel with that sort of nurturing essence of a mother, and people are, warm to me. They don't fear me. I really do think that women make the best ambassadors.
And the Dalai Lama would agree with you, and so would Ambassador Chadre, who created the culture of peace. And as you think about it, women have this caring heart. I want to read something from her book. She was the full-time occupation of raising 3 active children and supporting my husband's busy professional career. I was a woman shaken into action by what I saw as devastating conditions and treatment of people in places far from Iowa, which shattered me to the core. Not only did it shatter her, what did it do for you at that moment?
Well, it made me examine. Um, I'm an activist. What can I do? What makes sense to do? And obviously, you can't travel into a war zone as an individual, but I partnered with just the most exemplary and effective international humanitarian, and human rights organizations in the country. I worked as a volunteer, but I traveled with staff people who were um, deeply involved in wherever I went. One of the most powerful experiences for me was my 5 or 6 different trips to the former Yugoslavia during the War of Ethnic Cleansing in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I had traveled in the former Yugoslavia when my husband and I were there. He was a student at Oxford, and we traveled through Yugoslavia with a infant. We had a baby. Found the Yugoslav people to be so kind and so welcoming and honest, and I just couldn't imagine this war going on. And in part it was because they looked just like me. And I think I had to get over that sense of um, how people can be so hateful and divisive over issues that go back generations and hundreds of years.
They
Part
carry
of
the traumas of their ancestors, don't they?
right.
This is a really big sentence. You carry the traumas of our ancestors. That could be why my grandfather left Hungary, so he wouldn't have to carry those traumas of his ancestors to me as grandchild. I have
Yes,
that good fortune, right, Jane?
yes, absolutely. We are lucky. But I struggled with the title of this book, Barbara, because um, I really, my whole effort was to tell stories of people that I met. I told a lot of history, included a lot of history and geography and um, political issues and so on. So it's really a teaching of um, the last half of the 20th century, I would guess, and early 21st century. But I told it through stories of people that I met. And then I think that people can always relate to an individual experience. But I didn't really realize I was writing a memoir until a potential publisher told me it was a memoir and that I should put myself into it. So I ended up with the title World Citizen Journeys of a Humanitarian. And I, I realized that that's the purpose of my publishing this book, is to suggest to people that we're all world citizens and we should all be concerned about what's happening all around the planet. Right now, we have more refugees in the world than any time since World War II.
Mm.
People that are in desperate situation in search of homes. We've seen people drowning in the Mediterranean trying to get from North Africa to Greece or Italy and so on. And we see an ongoing war in Sudan that, for the past 20 years, the issues of Darfur and what's happening in Sudan have been the hot issues. There are conflicts all over the world. But I think we also have major work to do in our own country. When I hear hate speech and divisiveness and the othering of people, I realize that was at the core of what erupted into wars in these other countries. Words matter. And I think whether you choose to be a peace activist in your own community or in a country far away, it's really the same thing. We have to understand that we are all human beings. We're all children of God, if you would be. And I think we have more that unites us. We have much more alike than different.
We
And
are
that
all
I tell
human beings.
stories of people that I met because you see the core of their humanity, and you can care about one individual deeply, and hopefully that makes you care about the collective community and society and nation.
You said something very powerful, the core of humanity. And you always seem to, in your stories, talk about the blight of the vulnerable people. And then you advocate on their behalf. And if you want to know the consequences of human rights abuse, war zones are the good classrooms. And
Yes,
you spoke today. I know you've witnessed the horrors of war. You've witnessed the abuses. I remember you going in one of the stories. See, it's the stories that we remember. If we tell the stories in a way that gets us to keep reading, these stories will stay in our DNA and help us come forth. One story in particular, when you said you went to Nicaragua, that might have been one of your first trips, was it?
it was the very first trip. It was in
And
1984.
mhm.
My oldest daughter was a senior in high school, and I had two younger children. And I went down to witness what was happening during the Contra Wars, which was really a war being fought with proxies, a war between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. We used small third world countries as proxies for these little sort of minor wars because we couldn't um, engage in war with each other. We had enough nuclear weapons to destroy the entire world. So we the U.S. and the Soviet Union, um, they backed the communists, and we backed the freedom fighters, many of whom were really fascists. And I think that I had been working for many years on the issue of the nuclear arms race and the Cold War. And I wanted to see firsthand what was happening in Central America because we had many, many thousands of people from Nicaragua and El Salvador fleeing north to Southern California and across the border, much the same as happened during the Trump administration when they had the caravans of refugees coming out of Central America. So I went down with three other people from Pasadena to witness what was happening there. And it was a very, very impactful experience that affected the rest of my life.
See firsthand. How many people have the courage to see firsthand? What was it? I wrote these questions. Now, what was it that gave you the passion to take you into these war zones? Why were you brave? Why were you driven to action?
Well, I guess caring, compassion. You know, compassion is the emotion of really uh, caring for someone who's suffering, or for an animal. You feel sad, you want to do something to help. I take that a step further. I really am an empath. I feel empathy, which means I can feel the pain of someone else, which is a difficult thing. It's important to keep a bit of a separation. But you know, I was trained as a journalist, a photojournalist. I was a photographer, and I chose that path because I have incredible curiosity about the world. I wanted to go and see and experience and to meet people. And in Nicaragua, I met a comandante, one of the leaders of the Sandinista movement in Nicaragua, Tomas Borge. And he was greatly feared. He was in charge of what we would call Secretary of the Interior. He was in charge of the prisons and the police system in Nicaragua. And I found him to be such a loving man, complete. I mean, I was a little bit afraid to go into his office and meet with him. I wasn't alone, of course, was with my delegation, but we learned from his story that he had been held and tortured and beaten. He had
Mm,
been hung from his thumbs as
mm.
a form of torture. His wife had been tortured and raped and killed. And yet he reached out to the men who tortured him and forgave them. And he said to them, I know that um, you were ordered to do this, and I don't want you to carry this burden with you. I forgive you. A very profound,
That is
very
so,
profound lesson for me.
I'm speechless. I am totally speechless. I listened to Nelson Mandela when he forgave his torturers. And I listened to you, and I listened to my late husband, Robert Mueller, who said forgiveness is the highest of all virtues, because that's what we have to do today. But you living in this tortured, poverty-stricken, diseased areas and coming back to tell their story. What a gift you gave to these people. I see so much courage in you. As Ben Ferencz said, it takes courage to be discouraged. Did that work true for you?
Well, I guess it takes courage. I think it takes commitment. I mean, some days I'm scared, some days I'm courageous, but um, I just want to do my best, and I want to make a difference in the world. I think we're all here to for such a short time, and if I want to call myself humanitarian, I have to act. I have to live that every day of my life with every personal encounter. But going back to the telling the stories, when I first came back from Nicaragua, I was invited to speak at my church, very large Episcopal church in Pasadena, and I was terrified. And I was thinking to myself, you know, as women often do, we apologize for our lack of credentials, experience, titles, all of that. I was a mother. I was a very active community volunteer, but um, I wasn't an international professor. I wasn't a human rights expert. I didn't have any of those educational or experiential credentials. So I thought I have to tell the audience, let them know that how how much intelligence I have about this. So I started by saying how many people had been killed, all the statistics, um, how many refugees, how many raped women, and all of the facts of the situation. And I looked out at the audience thinking they were going to be nodding with affirmation of my intelligence, and I saw them nodding off to sleep. And so I just put down my notes and I said, let me tell you about this young prostitute that I met in Nicaragua. She was in a she had toddler children. She was in a program learning how to sew that she could support her children, because she had been selling her body as a prostitute for years. And she told me her story. I did the same thing when I went to the former Yugoslavia. I wanted to tell in my first speech all the facts of the issue, the history, and so on. And people were not interested in that. So I put down my notes and said, let me tell you about Menci, this amazing woman I met in central Bosnia, who started a program called Women Survivors of War Crimes. It's one of my favorite chapters. And she really helped teenage girls who were victims of massive rape to come back into their bodies because they were
Mhm.
so totally traumatized. And then I found that people were moved and they wanted to know more. It's always about the personal stories.
Hmm.
That's why so much nonfiction is written in a way as fiction by um, fleshing out characters. It's people. We want to know more about them and how they acted in history, but what is their story? So my book is a collection of stories of all of these incredibly inspirational people that thought of themselves as survivors, not victims, and reached out to help others.
That is so beautiful. And if you are listening to Jane today, this is Jane Olson, the 8th Annual Peace Awardee for Santa Barbara and Tri-Counties. You're going to hear a very profound statement. It's your story that people want to hear. It's the stories that she uncovered. We all have books filled with facts, But when you're telling an audience your story, it allows them to be one with you, to open up their hearts, to open up
Yes.
empathy, to leave the despair behind, and to be part of what Jane is saying. Did that
That's exactly right, Barbara.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My husband was a very famous UN official. He could talk about the facts, but it was his stories that made him a Nobel Peace Prize nominee, which I'm sure you have also been. It's your stories that you were able to recount. These stories, I cannot stop reading them. The book is half underlined and half tear jerked because I'm crying as I read. But by the same token, it was your strength that I kept getting, holding the slippers on my lap in the back seat. I silently berated myself to learn the donor's name and anything about her life. Suddenly, I looked down at the slippers and laughed, realizing they were much too small for my size. I broke the silence and tension by calling myself Cinderella's stepsister. Do you remember that on page 17, Jane, in this beautiful story?
I do remember it. In fact, I have those slippers right here because I did a talk last night for a
Slippers.
women's group, and I took the slippers because these were given to me, and
Oh,
this was my most consequential experience, the most impactful experience I had, and it was in Bosnia in a massive refugee camp where there were 3,500 women and children who had suffered unspeakable traumas. And I couldn't get any of them to talk to me. They were so traumatized. And of course, I, a Westerner, coming in with my journal and camera. So I simply sat down and started knitting. And pretty soon I had a circle of women around me. They brought their knitting and came and sat in a circle. And without thinking, this wasn't a rational decision, I just was frustrated. And I had created a circle of trust. And what we had in common was we all knew how to knit, but it was a safe place. And in the silence of that circle, the women began to tell their stories.
to be with them. You're bringing tears to my eyes. To hold up those slippers, holding the slippers on my lap in the back seat, and then for you to pull those slippers up from your wealth of information and presence and books, it tells me God is working overtime to bring you into your full potential, to share your story, to show people that you have spontaneous knowledge in the moment. I just sit there. I remember when you were in Nicaragua and you just sat there and knitted because this woman was so traumatized. She could no more tell you her story. And all she could do was breathe. And you
Right.
were with her as she had her breath and held her legs in this fetal position. This book, if anybody has any reason to not buy this book, you let me know. I'll tell you. Come on, don't worry about the 525 pages. Just buy this book and do like I do. Keep it on your desk for the motivation that will keep you going in your work that sometimes gets boring and tiring. This will keep you going. You know,
Yes. I also narrated it for an Audible book, ebook, and I have a Kindle version that has the photos in it. But the photos really make the book, I think, so powerful.
you were a photojournalist, and here you are on page 161 in the snow at front of a UN vehicle. Here you are collecting the pictures of the children's ethnic cleansing in Bosnia. The beautiful, it just could bring tears to your eyes now. Come on, people. If you haven't bought this book, get it today. I have a picture of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tombstones with crosses on them. That's the Bosnia ethnic cleansing. Come on, we've got to end war on this planet. Now, Jane is a woman who has chronicled the past with such elegance that you feel like you're there. Now we can learn from this. We can move forward and say, yes, war no more. And
Yes.
that's what the Pope said when he came to the United Nations, because Secretary General Outant said, we're never going to have peace until we have a spiritual moment. And my late husband, Robert Mueller, said, well, the Pope come, the Vatican is a member of the United Nations, the United Nations General Assembly. And the Pope came. And that's why Jane went to these places. She was there to tell her story. And what did the Pope say? I waited centuries for a global voice. And I have one message: never again war.
Right. But you know, poverty is a different kind of war on humanity. You know, I went to many places, especially in Africa, where the enemy was extreme poverty and disease. And some of my most impactful chapters, I think, are about the incredible poverty and disease in countries like Malawi and Ghana. And of course, the unspeakable genocide that happened in Rwanda. I have 2 chapters on Rwanda. The genocide in Rwanda was so immense and so unthinkable, unspeakable, that the only way I could cover the almost instant deaths of nearly 1 million people in just a 3-month period was to tell one woman's story. I told the story of one woman who was 16 years old when I met her. She lost 8 members of her family. Some were beheaded, some were shot. She managed to survive, but severely injured and went through all kinds of trauma, ended up in a morgue for 2 weeks under dead bodies, and a nurse kept her alive. And she ended up immigrating to the United States, and I've adopted her. But I tell her story in its fullness as a recitation of what happened in, you know, you can extrapolate to that to 800,000 or 1 million other lives, the madness that happened there. But again, she's a survivor. And I think that's, and I just was with her on Saturday. She came to my grandson's football game with her children.
So there's hope. There's
There is hope.
hope.
There is hope in these, you know, the human beings have an incredible ability to survive. And the only way this young woman who saw the most horrific war crimes that anyone could imagine, Rwanda was the epitome of
You know,
evil.
and these are going on now in Ukraine, in Gaza, and around the world. And if you want to meet Jane, and I think you would have no reason not to want to meet her, come to Santa Barbara, October the 3rd, and be there at this dinner at Pascucci's from 5 to 6:30. We are going to have her books available. You won't have to go on Amazon and wait. You can buy the book that night and you can take it home and do as I do. In fact, I'm going to call all the people who comes to the dinner on October 3rd to celebrate Jane and to celebrate peace and to celebrate the United Nations. I'm going to have us have a conversation. We'll invite Jane to just talk on Zoom, and we'll talk about her book and the memories that she brings to us. So that's, again, our opportunity to thank Jane for being a journalist, a photographer, which allows people to see and hear. And now she has an audio book too. So Jane, I am so honored to say congratulations, to be in Santa Barbara, in Montecito, continuing your work and making sure that the world understands it's our stories they want to hear. It's our stories. And her book is like, should be made into a movie. It's a storybook of the tragedies of our planet. Who, with a woman who's a mother who said, I can't take it anymore. I'm going to go see what's going on and I'm going to tell their stories.
Yep.
Again,
Well, that was the first step, and one thing always leads to another. So, you know, I just kept answering invitations. And, you know,
and
I've been speaking a lot to students, Barbara, and I tell them, pay attention to what comes your way. Pay
yes,
attention to what you're asked to do,
yes,
because I didn't go seeking this. I never imagined this kind of a life, but every time I said yes, doors opened to just incredible experiences, and that let everything, one thing led to another. You
That
show
opens
up and you do
my
your best.
that opens up my tears again to say yes. What the universe supports the world that needs you now. Watch what comes your way. I've always said there's these coincidences that happen are there for your learning and for your empathy and for your action, right, Jane?
Yes, yes.
Well, as you can see, this has been quite a conversation. This is beautiful, Jane Olson, our 8th annual awardee for the Peace Prize, who deserves more than just our Peace Prize, deserves a Nobel Peace Prize as a journalist. Maybe you should get the Pulitzer Prize.
I just want to sell books and have people read the stories because they will be
Okay,
deeply
you
moved.
heard her. Buy 10 books when you come to dinner with us. Not 10, 25. Take them to your community and hand them out and have a Zoom call. Zoom is a miracle, people. Why do you think I can be in Santa Barbara and interview 141, and this is 141, peace builders from their point of view, from their actions, from their voices? And with that, Jane, do you have a message for the planet besides love, patience, confidence, and mutually assured survival? Tell us your dream for the world.
Well, I think the fundamental truth of reality is that we're all one. It's all energy. And I think the operating energy of the universe is love.
Oh my. Well, you got me again. We are all one in the operating.
Energy.
Thank you. I can't talk after I start crying sometimes. I shouldn't cry first. The energy that we get from love is the answer. And people say to me, and I'm sure they say it to you, Jade, well, how come you're so optimistic? I said, because I come from love. And I see love in everybody I meet. My grandmother said she loved me. My grandfather told me he loved me. And I come from love for the world, and I love the people. And I love you, Jane.
Well, we're the lucky ones, aren't we, Barbara? If
Very.
we can inspire others to look beyond their own comfortable lives, and you just really need to touch one person to have made a difference. That's one of the reasons I was walking with Sharon Byrne on the trails around Santa Barbara to find and offer help to the homeless. If I'm
The
going to do it abroad, I
unhoused,
should do it at home. It's an everyday thing.
and they live in amazing situations. And Jane, you took it upon yourself to walk with Sharon. And now I want you all to walk with us on October 3rd. Come to Santa Barbara and be with Jane. And she's going to bring lots of books and you can take them home with you. And with that, I thank you for being on peacepodcast.org. And every person who watches this, in fact, don't watch it alone. Bring in 5 people to be with you and hear the stories of Jane's life. She was comfortable. She was in a home with children and a beautiful husband, but she saw the atrocities on the TV and said, I have to be there. And with that, I hope you will join us again. October 3rd is just around the corner. Plan to come join with us. And if you don't have a place to stay, you call me. I'll put you at the Cabrillo Inn. The Cabrillo Inn is right on the beach and it's very reasonable. If you want to go uptown, go to the Lemon Tree. We have hotels and this is off season. You can get a great rate. Come to Santa Barbara. With that, Jane, I thank you. I love you. And oh my God, your book has turned the pages over and over again. It's half underlined, but it's about ending war and bringing peace to our planet. With that, thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Barbara. It's been a great pleasure.
My pleasure. So people, you want to meet Jane? Join us. And I love you. Go to UNASB.org for tickets. And I'll see you on October 3rd. And I'll also be hoping that you play this video for everybody you love. Remember, we're on Spotify if you want to play it in your car. We're also on YouTube. And we're also on Apple Podcasts. Thank you for joining us.